Okay, I just want to thank Mr. Johnson for this opportunity. Last week he asked for someone to come in and speak who was a vet. And I just happened to have a couple of vets in my family. My father served during the Vietnam War, but my grandfather served during World War II. I just want to tell you a little bit about my grandpa. He is 92 years old. So he's seen a lot and he's done a lot. I also want to recognize my grandma, who's here today with us. In May, they will have been married for 70 years. Yeah. Now, they are both very inspirational to me. I love and adore them. As a young kid, about your age, I remember sitting with my grandpa and listening to his stories. So I know you're going to enjoy this. Now, my grandfather served in the Navy in 1942. From 1942 until 1945, on Navy Day in 1945, he was released and arrived in Salt Lake City. So I want you guys to pay attention, listen. I know you'll enjoy the stories he has to share. He witnessed a lot of things that you might learn about in your history class. He was there, he saw it. And so without any further ado, I'd like to introduce my grandfather, Jim Kearl. While he's walking up, I also want you to know that I have two daughters in this school, and so this is their great grandpa. So, Grandpa, here you go.
Good morning. I hope each one of you can stand where I'm standing and see the beautiful sight of young faces. I love the youth. I better have anyway, I have 35 grandchildren, 58 great-grandchildren. But you're the cream of the crop. You came here when you were needed. And so, without further ado, I guess I'll tell you a little story. A story of how I became a veteran. You know what a veteran is? You know, a veteran is someone who has served in the armed forces, the Army, the Navy, the Marines, or the Coast Guard. So my experience started on December the 2nd, 1941. With the Japanese bombard Pearl Harbor. I was here in Salt Lake City, and I had dinner with my future wife. Well, I prepared myself, and then in August of 1942, I had a phone call from my cousin saying, "Jim, your name comes up tomorrow if you don't want to go in the Army you've got today to decide." So I didn't think I liked the Army, so I joined the Navy. I went from Salt Lake City to San Diego, California, to the Naval Training Station there. There I went through a training session. And after I'd gone through boot camp, as they called it, I was chosen to go to a school. It was called a fire control school. And in the fire control school, I learned how to aim and fire big guns. Now, you'll see some pictures of the ship that I served on. And as I finished school, I came up to San Francisco, and there I was put on transport. And if you can believe it, this transport took Army personnel from the United States to Europe in World War I. And it took us 8 days to go from San Francisco to Pearl Harbor. As we arrived in Pearl Harbor, there was still a big foot of oil on the bay in Pearl Harbor. Many of the ships were still on their side. Many of them, they were starting to repair them. And as I went to the receiving area, the next morning I got up and my name was called, and I went over to the officer that was officiating, and he gave me a slip of paper, and here he said, here's your assignment. This is where you will serve. And as I looked at it, it said Salt Lake City. I said, what did they send me to Salt Lake City for? But I forgot to see the other 3 letters. USS Salt Lake City, United States ship, number 25, Salt Lake City. Well, as I went aboard to Salt Lake City, I was amazed. I couldn't believe it was a heavy cruiser. And it's a city block long. And as I went aboard, I was met by the division officer that I was assigned to, and he took me to where I would spend the next 3 years. And the next morning, my name was called over the loudspeaker, and I said, uh-oh, what have I done now? I thought I'd been obeyed all the rules. Will you please meet so-and-so in Combat Information Center? And I said, well, where's Combat Information Center? So they told me, so I went up there, and there a young lieutenant came up and said, Mr. Kearl, we're going to make some changes in your assignments. I said, I beg your pardon. I'm trained to be a gunner. And they said, well, now you're going to join another division. And this division was the radar division. It's the radar, I'm sure all of you know or have heard of it. But the USS Salt Lake City had the highest antenna in any ship in the fleet. And so it was one of the only few warships that were still in service after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And so I went aboard the ship, and a week later we sailed, and we were assigned to go to Alaska. And we started out by our captain came aboard ship, and he said, our intelligence has told us that the Japanese are on their way to Alaska. How many of you knew that, you adults, how many of you knew that there were Japanese soldiers on American land? The Aleutian Islands, there was an island called Rat Island, and the Japanese had a force of army there, and they had 3 transports full of soldiers that they were bringing to increase their health so that they could get an airfield built there. And so we was assigned to locate that task force and engage it. So there was 4 destroyers, the Salt Lake City, which is a heavy cruiser, and the Richmond, which is a light cruiser. The Salt Lake City, as you can see there, had 10 8-inch guns on it, 5 5-inch guns, and it had 6 squads of 40, and I don't remember how many 20s, but there were 30 or 40 20 millimeter guns aboard ship. And So, being a radarman, I was in the Combat Information Center, and after about 5 o'clock in the morning, we picked up on the radar a convoy, and we knew what it was. And so, to make it a long story short, after a long day for us, we engaged the enemy, and it turned out that it was the longest naval engagement in the history of the Navy. 3 hours and 50 minutes of continuous bombarding, firing. We took several hits, and the ship became dead in the water. Our burners were out, and we were dead in the water. And the captain got aboard, or on the loudspeaker, and said, "I hate to say this, but prepare to abandon ship." Well, you know what we did? We just sat where we were. The temperature outside was 57 degrees below zero. And they would say that we would probably live for maybe 10 to 15 minutes in the water. So we just sat there. Thanks to a wonderful crew of sailors working as hard as they could, they finally got all the water out of the burners and switched to another tank, and we got underway. We lost several seamen, several members of the ship. Our ship was blown off. We lost our ship. And so then we went to San Francisco, where we went to repair, and I got my first leave. After I returned to the ship, we went to the South Pacific. Let me give you a little history of the USS Salt Lake City. This picture here is she at Moore and Pearl here in San Francisco, where she was being repaired. The USS Salt Lake City saw more engagements than any other ship in the United States Navy, fired more ammunition, shot down more planes, shot down more, or sunk more ships, and saw more action than any other ship in the fleet. Let me just tell you about a couple of the engagements. I don't know how my time is, so I'll try to hurry. We had been bombing several of the islands in the area, and we joined the task force, and we went to what they called the Gilbert Islands. And there for 4 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock in the morning, like we were shelling and bombing the island. There was an old ship that was sunk and laying along beside the edge of the water. And our captain asked the admiral if he couldn't throw a few shells in there to make sure that there was nothing there. And the admiral said, "No, don't waste your shells on that. Our intelligence has told us that there's nothing there." So we pulled off a little and continued bombing the beaches. Well, then our landing craft came, and as they came, why, the sides of that ship opened up, and they started firing. I hate to say things like this, but that day, the Marine Corps lost 5,000 men on just one island. Well, you can know what happened then. The admiral said, "Go to us, Salt Lake," so we put about 30 8-inch shells in it, and that took care of that problem. And then the other islands, we participated in the Philippines. I'm sure all of you have heard of the island Iwo Jima. Iwo Jima was a fortress. The Japanese had spent years on that island preparing for this situation. And so every week we would go up and bombard the island and go back and get new ammunition. And we were there on the day of the invasion. One morning, about 3 weeks later, why our captain got a message and said, will you take the Salt Lake City around to the north side of Mount Suribachi? The Marines are going to raise a flag on that island that day. There's a picture of that flag in that island. And so we immediately went around and started throwing shells into the area below where there was a raised flag. And our captain got a little anxious and speeded up a little, and we ran aground. The Salt Lake City went aground and couldn't get off. So we had a perfect picture. I left Combat Information Center, and it's about in the middle of the high part of the ship there. And I went up on the forecastle of the ship, and I was able to see the Marines raised the flag in Iwo Jima. And I have a picture of that flag raising. Iwo Jima was a rough one. We lost scores of personnel. And then from there, we went back to the Philippines and fueled up and got new ammunition and headed for Okinawa. I don't know if you've heard of Okinawa or not, but that wasn't too far from the mainland of China. We arrived there and we spent a total of 58 days there. We were there a week before the invasion. We were there during the invasion, and then we were there until they secured the island. This was an interesting place. I got many free showers from Japanese kamikazes as they would get through our picket line. We had destroyers surrounding the island, and they took the brunt of the kamikazes. But we had many that was close enough that if you were outside, you got wet. After the invasion of Okinawa was completed, we went back to the Philippines, and there once again, we replaced everything we needed. Here's a cute story. Everything wasn't serious in the war. I was responsible for seeing that we had all the spare parts we needed for our radar. And I had quite a list, and they told me, well, there's a fly depot about 5 miles in the island. I'm sure they'll have all you need. So they took me to shore, and there a chief picked me up in the dryer of the Philippines, and he took me to the supply office, and for once, I got everything I needed. On the way back, I commented on finger bananas. Have you ever seen a finger banana? It's about the size of your finger, and the stalks are about 18, 20 inches long. And he said, how would you like one of those to take back to your ship? I said, I'd love it. So he stopped the seat, jumped out, and climbed up the tree, cut one down, and gave it to me. Well, you know what happened aboard Salt Lake City that night? The radar gang had bananas, but I had a good friend in the commissary, and he brought up a couple of gallons of ice cream, and we Captain Anderson. Then we joined the task force, and we were on our way to bombard Tokyo. That was our destination. And one early in the morning, the captain came in and said, "Tune your radio for this frequency." He said, "There's something going on. I can't say much about it, but there's something going on, and let's see if we can get in on it." So we tuned the radio to that frequency, and then all of a sudden we heard a voice of the pilot. Said, "We're about 5 minutes away, and I'm turning the ship over to the navigator, the bombardier." And he took over, and you could hear him choking for a minute. And then the bombardier said, "We're about there." He said, and he counted from 10 to 1. And when he said one, the first atomic bomb was dropped on land. It was only seconds after it was dropped we heard a holler, and I won't use the word as he said. He said, we have been blown at least 500 feet straight up from the concussion of the bomb." And then our rudder was shaken, and we went up to Alaska. They dropped the second bomb, and then the Japanese surrendered, and Tokyo Bay, of course, you've all heard of it, but the treaty was signed aboard the Missouri. And we were assigned to go to a naval base in upper part of Japan. They had a naval base there called Salt Lake City, and 4 destroyers went into the naval base as occupation forces. Well then, of course, the war had ended, and sailors were going home. I had plenty of points, and when they were getting ready to go, the captain came in and said, "Kearl," he said, "I have bad news for you." I said, "Well, what is it, Captain?" He said, "You can't go home." He said, "I'm going to keep you aboard until a replacement comes from you that it's got to come from the state." Well, this was about the 10th of September, and I got home to Salt Lake City on the 27th of October, Navy Day. Last night there was a ceremony up in River City, and there were 3 World War II there, and we were all that they gave us. I hope and pray that each one of you will take advantage of the opportunity that is yours of growing and learning, getting the knowledge you'll need to help you in your years to come. As I look over this audience, I feel good. I know that all over the whole United States, there are groups just like you, ready and preparing yourself to take over the leadership of this great nation. And it is a great nation. I love it and honor it. And I especially thank you for the opportunity of being here, to sharing with you just a few moments of my life that made me a veteran. Thank you. God bless you.
Could we have Mr. Kearl's great-grandchildren come up here? I'd like to get a picture with them as well. You may be seated.